I don't remember, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think something like 10 of the 100 bottlenecks were in the New York metro area, of course, including, as you said, the George Washington Bridge. And my gosh, anybody who's ever tried to take the George Washington Bridge, be it in a tractor trailer or my dad's freaking Jetta, it is a disaster. It is a nightmare crossing that bridge any time of day, any time of year. It is atrocious. Welcome to Stream, a trucktractortrailer.com production. My name is Zach Miller. I'm your host, and I'm honored today to be joined by Rebecca Brewster, who is the President and Chief Operating Officer of the American Transportation Research Institute, or ATRI for short. And let me just say before we get to Rebecca, if you are a member of any of your state trucking associations, so as people know, I'm on the board of the New York State Trucking Association, go see at their annual conference or safety conference, whatever conference that Rebecca or one of her colleagues at ATRI speaks at, go to it. It is the most valuable half an hour presentation you will have if you make your living in trucking. I've been to, I think, 3 or 4 of them now with Rebecca, and I've learned something every time, even though I read the ATRI reports. So Rebecca, with that, welcome and thanks for joining us here today.
Well, thank you, Zach. You're very kind. And truly, our partnership with the state trucking associations and our ability to go and speak to those audiences is one of my favorite parts of my job, because those are the folks who are in the trenches and who are making this country move every day. And it's a real privilege to do work on their behalf and to be able to go and talk to them about the work that ATRI is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's so, you're great at it. It's great that you enjoy it, because sometimes, unfortunately, you do have to be the bearer of bad news, which is why we have you on the podcast today. So for the last 15 years, ATRI has done a report for operational costs of trucking. And this year which is not a surprise to you, but still, you have to see the numbers. This was the most expensive year on record to operate a trucking company.
It was, and just some background on this research. When we first did our first operational costs of trucking, it was in 2008, and it was intended just to be a one-time shot. And amazingly, it was really intended to be an input into the public sector decision-making process, because there were so many different figures out there, outrageous figures for what it costs to operate a truck, for everything from $15 an hour to $430 an hour. And depending on what your purposes were in government, you might want that low end. So if you were putting in a toll or a congestion pricing, you might say, well, you know, it only costs you or it costs you this much, so we're going to save you time. But the fact of the matter was, none of those amounts were actually built on real world data. And so our research advisory committee, the group that tells us what work we should be doing for the industry, said, you know what, let's collect motor carrier data, real world data, and put some real world data out there for the public sector to use. Well, guess what? We did that. Public sector appreciated that, but let me tell you who really appreciated it was the private sector and motor carriers, who said, wow, we've never had access to a free, because ATRI gives all of its research away at no cost, a free benchmarking tool to gauge how our operation is relative to our peers. And so we made the decision we're going to do this on an annual basis. And so each year participation has grown. This year we had a record number of motor carriers participate in the data collection. The data set itself represents over 173,000 power units, 550,000 plus trailers, about 14.6 billion vehicle miles traveled. So it is a substantive data set of truck industry data, from fleets of one truck to huge 1,000+ vehicle fleets. And so it really does cover the continuum in terms of size and sector representation. And you're right. So getting straight to the punchline, that this is the costliest year we've had in the years we've been doing this research. So the 2022 report captures 2021 data, where the average cost per mile to operate a large commercial vehicle was $1.85, almost $1.86, 1.855. So the highest on record. We saw several of the, so if you haven't seen the report, for your viewers, it breaks out the cost by a number of line items, vehicle line items and driver line items. And several of those hit record highs for us in the time we've been doing this. We saw a record high in truck trailer lease purchase payments. We saw a record high in repair and maintenance costs. And of course, no surprise with the driver shortage, we saw a record high in the driver wage cost per mile.
Yeah, it's wild. And so as you said, and that's the 2021 number. So that doesn't even factor in the rising fuel costs that hit in, really Q2 here, 2022, which, and the labor costs as well. So one figures that there's a possibility that we break this record again next year. Who knows? We still have another couple of months here in 2022. But I looked at that jump to $1.855, and I was just like, that is crazy. And then it was almost 13% just the overall cost to fleets.
Right. So that's a big annual jump, and we've not seen a jump like that in a long time. And again, it was no surprise to anyone because everyone has individually been feeling this pain. But when you pull together that kind of data set, it really illuminates for both the private sector, but also the public sector, what we're dealing with. And it's so critical at a time like now, like what you're experiencing in New York with the new congestion pricing plan that's out there. When you think about how expensive it is for a motor carrier to operate within Manhattan, and now we've got this congestion pricing zone, and we have, through the assessment, the new environmental assessment, have a glimpse of what that might cost in terms of tolls, as high as $82 per trip. It's just going to make it, fleets won't be able to go in. It's just too expensive.
No, absolutely. It really will put them out of business. And there's such that's the interesting thing, right? Because so many economists and forecasters look to trucking as the bellwether, because how many trucks are on the road, how many trucks are moving, what are the freight rates, what's the cost of trucking? These are really good barometers for how the economy is doing and sort of where it's going, quarter to quarter. And that's exactly it. The fact that these costs to trucking shot up so much, to your point about the congestion pricing, if they really make it $82 a pop to enter the Manhattan zone, these are major economic ramifications. These are companies that will either shut their doors or just move out of the area, impacting the rates and costs to all these other businesses and all these end consumers. And I think that's one of it really is fascinating when this report was released, all the economic news, but that is the fact. These are 2021 numbers even. So it's just like, if the national conversation is, what is an acceptable amount for companies to pass costs on to the end consumer? That conversation needs to really be revved up here when we're talking about the trucking costs, and especially in places like New York, like California, I think they seem to think that trucking companies are much more profitable than they really are.
Absolutely. And we know that's just not the case. And we know, and in fact, we've made this case over and over and over when we talk about our annual truck bottleneck list, which we've been doing for a number of years, like the ops cost. And you all are no strangers to that bottleneck list there, because you have the #1 truck bottleneck in the country, the George Washington Bridge. Now, I think 4 years running, the #1 location on our list. Every time I talk to the media about that, I make the point that these are truck bottlenecks. These are congestion choke points for us. We're not causing the congestion. These are just places where it's very difficult for us to operate. But as we're struggling with that congestion, we're running up these costs because we have a cost per hour here. It's costly for us to sit there. And ultimately, who pays that price? You and I do, and every consumer does, and the price of all the goods that are on that truck, because someone has to bear that cost, and the trucking company can't bear it alone.
Absolutely. And that's another great thing about all the ATRI research. you could look at every report that ATRI drops over the course of a year and look at it as like a chapter in a book. And that's exactly where you see these costs rising. You look at the bottlenecks. So I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think something like 10 of the 100 bottlenecks were in the New York metro area. Of course, including, as you said, the George Washington Bridge. And my gosh, anybody who's ever tried to take the George Washington Bridge, be it in a tractor trailer or my dad's freaking Jetta, it is a disaster. It is a nightmare crossing that bridge any time of day, any time of year. It is atrocious, but there's actually a link there, right? So you have the number one in the GW. You're crossing into the city. You mentioned congestion pricing, so imagine there's that congestion pricing tax. Then you get out of Manhattan into Queens. Maybe you want to go upstate towards Westchester. That Whitestone area is also one of the top 10 bottlenecks. So you're talking about regional freight, regional congestion, and delays, and this has a massive impact on the nation's entire economy.
It does. I mean, you can't view any of these, and I don't want to get too hung up on bottlenecks, but you can't view any of these as an individual choke point. I mean, I live in Atlanta. I-285 is our perimeter that goes around Atlanta. We've got, I think, 7 of the Georgia top bottlenecks are actually on the perimeter. I mean, and I can see the perimeter out my office window. And you think about where Georgia and Atlanta are positioned, and that's a lot of, it's not local freight, that's through freight. That's, stuff coming out of Florida and moving onwards, or stuff going down to Florida. I mean, we are just really, a freight hub here in Atlanta, and all that traffic is driving up cost for the trucking company, slowing freight, making drivers miss their appointments. I mean, you just can't, and so it's having ripple impacts throughout the country. I mean, you just can't view any of these individual issues in its own silo because they are so connected. And I appreciate your analogy to chapters in a book, because I mean, I think about just the stuff we've put out just this year. Before the operational costs of trucking, we had how to integrate younger adults into the trucking industry. So we have all this congestion that's making the job of driving a truck harder. And the men and women who have been in this industry a long time are thinking, I'm going to hang it up. I've had enough. It's time for me to retire. But we're not backfilling with young people coming into the industry to drive those trucks. So, we've got to do a better job as an industry in understanding how to better bring those young people into the industry and keep them here. So that was a critical report we put out just last month.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that, and as you said earlier, the data is viewed by both the public and the private sector. So you hope that the public decision makers are really reading these reports and understanding what's at play there. And I think some of the, another thing we talk about in trucking when it comes to regulation so often is the unintended consequences. And I do think, especially as both industry and regulation wants to move in this more sustainable, a lower emission vehicle future, there has to be an understanding that when the costs go up the way they are, forget about the actual EVs or just the today operational cost of trucking, for them to skyrocket the way that they are. For the fact is, trucking companies, the margins are only about 1.5% to 2% profit margin on average overall. So it's like, where are you expecting these investments in sustainability, in efficiency, when the company is basically worried about if they're even going to make it month to month, quarter to quarter?
Right. And I mean, honestly, when I think about all the industry has invested over my career in the industry, 30 plus years, to reduce our environmental footprint, and the cost that we have expended in, cleaning up our act, we really have just made tremendous strides in our equipment. And we have absorbed a lot of that cost ourselves as an industry in order to do so, because that's good business and that's what we want to do. But there will come a breaking point. And when you set a record just cost per mile for the industry, like we're seeing now, even when you carve out fuel, which we know was particularly high, even when you carve that out, the cost per mile was still up over 10 cents per mile from last year to this year. And so it's just a big jump, and there's just going to have to come a breaking point at some point where we're not going to be able to absorb all these costs.
Absolutely. And I think the scary thing is we're at that breaking point now. I mean, that's why I cannot recommend people read this report enough. You know, we're going to have the link. It's right there in the description. As Rebecca said, it's free. Download it, read it at your leisure, but it is really important reading. Everybody, public, private, even if you're not in trucking, you're relying on trucks to get what you need. So you really need to be on top of this. And that, I think, really is the fear, that we're there, that breaking point is there. I don't think any of us are optimistic that the operational costs of 2022 are going to be any better. It's just like, we need to see relief now in order to keep this industry moving the economy the way it needs to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, and people all often ask us, you know, when we're talking about potential research topics, have you looked at the cost of regulations? And that's a topic that gets discussed by our research advisory committee oftentimes. But when you think about regulated industries, there's probably nobody more regulated than the trucking industry. And trying to capture the cost of all of that is a scope that I don't think we could take on at ATRI in any given year. But you do see a lot of those regulations play out in these cost line items. I mean, for instance, tolls and how we pay for transportation infrastructure. In the full report of operational costs, we break out the cost by region of the country. And as is no surprise, the Northeast is the highest of the 5 regions that we examine, in large part because those toll costs are so much higher for fleets that operate predominantly in the Northeast.
Yeah, exactly. I know ATRI provides the state associations with that sort of data. You know, what is the cost in your state for the trucks? And yeah, I mean, I think New York, it's like 20 grand. I think it's 20 grand per truck just in user fees and tolls, like user fee tax tolls. It's wild. I mean, and try to factor, people think about getting into trucking, factor that into your cost. It's nothing else. Put it in mind, just your 20 grand in the hole in your tolls and user fee taxes. I mean, it's wild.
It is.
Rebecca, somebody wants to get in touch with you, with ATRI, for maybe they want information on a report, maybe they want to contribute to a report, have you come speak at an event. How would they get in touch with you?
Well, certainly all of our research, as I mentioned, is available as a free download from our website. And it's real easy to remember because it's what we do, truckingresearch.org. And you'll find on our website, all of our research is grouped by what we call research hot topics. So if you're looking at autonomous vehicles or economic analyses or environmental research, it's all grouped by hot topic. Operational costs, this latest report has its own tab. You can download the latest report. And I appreciate you mentioning how can they support us, because all of ATRI's research is supported through charitable contributions. And so fleets, large and small, individuals in the trucking industry, Zach, we've even had truck drivers send us a contribution because they appreciate the work that we do on behalf of the industry. And those $25 contributions from drivers are among the most gratifying we've received, because they really speak to the value that the drivers see in the work we do on behalf of the trucking industry. Giving is easy. You can do that on our website as well.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for all you and your team at ATRI do for this industry.
Thank you so much, Zach.
You guys like the content you see, please subscribe, and we'll see you next time on stream.